Hey you guys, what's going on? It's Ari, and for today's video, I'm gonna be comparing 70s and 80s fashion. I like to thrift and look at vintage stuff, so even though I'm more into the 60s, 70s style clothes, I still notice like the 80s style clothes, and I still enjoy looking at that style too. It's not like I buy only 60s and 70s clothes. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of do another comparison of eras. And last time I did a 60s and 70s video, so now I'm gonna do the 70s and the 80s, because I know like some people are really getting into, like in general now, like the 80s trend is becoming very big, and even the 70s trend. So I thought that would be cool to kind of compare the two, maybe if you guys are interested in that kind of style. I'm not an expert on vintage style or anything, so these are more like stuff that I just observed as like I looked online or like at clothes. So yeah, let's get started. So the first thing that I've noticed is that the 70s was really inspired by like a bohemian style, so they wore a lot of really more natural stuff, and it just had like that hippie style that the 70s are really kind of famous for. And I've noticed they have like really loose fabrics, really loose silhouettes. They had bell bottoms. That's really when the bell bottoms started being used, and it just was much more natural, and you could see that reflected in the silhouettes, in the colors, in the patterns. The patterns were like groovy and really wavy, so like that was coming out of the really mod and like rectangular, angular patterns from the 60s. Yeah, those were like the 70s kind of aesthetic. Whereas with the 80s, you got, again, almost harkening back to the 60s, a kind of angular and really primary color-esque inspired look. So like you had blazers with really angular shoulders, you had silhouettes that were much more boxy and blocky. Like it just wasn't natural like the 70s used to be. The 80s just became more about angular silhouettes and bold colors. It just kind of, you left behind that the kind of naturalness of the 70s, and you got this really bold style. The aesthetic, like if you look at the style that's coming back from the 80s, it's bright, it's colorful, there's a lot of stripes, a lot of maybe even polka dots, and like a lot of cool patterns like those. Whereas in the 70s, it was just more like flowy and stuff. So that's one thing that I've noticed. Another thing that I've noticed about the 70s and 80s is their pants. So in the 70s, like the staple pant was the bell bottom, and they used to wear that a lot. Like with suits, you would have a one piece. Well, like they sold the blazers and the pants together, and you got the big bell bottom suit pants. And then you had like the jeans, the classic Levi's bell bottom jeans that were like not just flared. It was not just boot cut. It was like full on, really big bell bottom. And those were like really the staples of that time, and I think they were worn quite a bit. You got like the hip huggers. They were like really tight up here, and they hugged your hips obviously, and you had the big, like you even had those without flare, I think. I'm not sure if that started in the 70s or that was really an 80s thing, but like yeah, it was a lot about flare, a lot about denim and stuff, and even denim jackets, which actually that trend I think translated quite well into the 80s, because in the 80s I feel like the pants became a lot more about like oversized trousers, like shorts. You had a lot of high-waisted things, so you got like high-waisted jeans that were not necessarily bell bottoms. They were more just like all over, like straight jeans, but they were like cinched in at the waist. And then you had the big shorts. They were like these shorts that you like, they were high-waisted and you put a little belt to like secure them, but then they were like big, kind of like Bermuda shorts that are worn now by men, but like back then it was more of a women's trend, I think. So there was that, and then there was like the trouser pants that were just huge and big and balloony, and you wore them like, they were high-waisted too, so you wore them with like a sweater or a turtleneck, and then you put a big blazer on top. Like, I've seen a lot of the celebrities from the 80s wearing that look, like a huge blazer, like these really big trousers. So I think I really noticed the difference in the pants from the 70s and 80s. I feel also like the color palettes were very different. So like in the 70s, you had really natural colors. You had like oranges, yellows, blues, maybe some dusky reds. Whereas in the 80s, you had really bright, really colorful primary color stuff. So like in the 70s, you had leather, like brown, light brown, suede. You got like really soft, almost pastel looking colors. A lot of yellow. I feel like when I think of 70s, I just think of yellow. And like the patterns had a lot of swirly shapes, and most of the colors used in those like patterns were soft pinks, oranges, greens, and they were usually very soft and light. Whereas in the 80s, you got a lot of blacks, whites, monochromes, really bright greens, blues, yellows, reds. Like it was like the totally bright and much more bold version of those 70s colors. And I think like that if you look at the accessories that they wore back then, they were totally different in that like they were very geometric and had really bright colors. So now like that especially is coming back in trend. I've noticed that a lot about some of the 80s clothes. Usually you know exactly if you see a pair of 80s earrings that's really bright blue or pink or like neon, then you're pretty sure it's from the 80s and forward. It probably is not from the 70s. So in the 70s, I think there was a lot more beads and like soft colors to go with that. So again, it's like the whole idea of soft and naturalness that permeates the whole 70s style as opposed to the 80s, which was more bold and blocky. I think that a big difference between the 70s and the 80s that I've noticed at least is that in the 70s, the dress was just much more feminine, and in the 80s, the style just became much more androgynous. So like in the 70s, I feel that they still wore a lot of dresses and skirts, even as like I feel like it was slowly going from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, the dresses and skirts started becoming less and less common. So in the 70s, you probably wore less dresses than in the 60s, but you still wore them. Like a lot of the dresses and skirts that you see that are from the 70s still look a lot like the stuff that was from the 60s. So whereas with the 80s, I feel like they really just started wearing pants as staples, and the clothes just started becoming much more androgynous. You got sweaters that looked alike in the men and the women. You got like t-shirts and belts and, you know, shoes, sneakers. It became much more androgynous in the 80s. And I feel that's something that really separates almost the 20th century. Like in the 60s and 70s, that style can kind of really be grouped together by the kind of dresses, the skirts that they wore, whereas in the 80s and 90s, I feel that it just became much more androgynous as it is today, and that's really, you can separate that a lot. So like the 70s and 80s, I feel, are two decades that are besides each other, but that can really easily be distinguished. So that's one big thing that I've noticed. So like in the 80s, you got the really big trousers, and blazers were becoming really common, as well as turtlenecks, big sweaters, and I think the whole oversized trend that became very big then is also like a reflection of that. So like you didn't really see that in the 70s at all. And in the 70s, you wore a lot of like still kind of mod inspired dresses. You had the wrap dress from Diane von Furstenberg. You had like the really cool patterns. You had bell bottoms, which were still worn with really lacy and feminine tops. And in the 80s, that just kind of totally turned on its head. So I think that's a big distinguishing, can I say that word correctly? The big distinguishing factor between 70s and 80s clothes, and like the whole era, like 60s, 70s, between 80s and 90s. So that's one big thing that I've noticed, I think. So yeah, that's kind of what I've noticed about the 70s and 80s and the differences between the two eras. So yeah, that's my video. So if this video was helpful to you guys, don't forget to subscribe and let me know like what you've noticed in the comments below. Let me know like what kind of style you enjoy more and the stuff that you've noticed from looking at those styles. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you later.